Imagine if, at this very moment, someone was observing you, assessing every choice you make, and your entire future rested on your actions in the coming minute. For Alara Vance, that moment arrived without a single note of warning. On a perfectly average Tuesday morning, a single, split-second choice set her life on an entirely new trajectory. Have you ever considered whether the small kindnesses, the ones offered when you believe no one is watching, actually carry any weight? The Global Tech Summit 2025 was a hive of frantic energy, with CEOs and industry titans converging on Chicago's opulent Lakeshore Grand Hotel. Elira, a 28-year-old single mother with gentle hazel eyes that often held a flicker of anxiety, was meticulously arranging name badges for the VIP attendees, her fingers betraying a slight tremor. Her mentor, Eleanor Hayes, had offered some comforting words that morning. "Just remember, half these people can't recall what they ate for breakfast," she'd said with a wry smile. "But you'll remember their names. That's your special power." When Mr. Kenji Tanaka approached her station, Elara's gaze caught the lettering on his badge, Mr. Tanaka Kenji. It was a simple reversal, one most Westerners wouldn't even register, but in Japanese culture, it was a significant breach of etiquette, a loss of face. The memory of her grandfather's voice surfaced, a warm and steady echo from her childhood. A name holds a person's story and their honor. Treat it with the same respect you would offer the person themselves. Ilera quickly scanned the bustling lobby. No one else had caught the mistake. Without drawing any attention to herself, she quietly reprinted the badge, ensuring the name was in the correct order. She presented it with a soft smile and a subtle, respectful bow. "Welcome, Mr. Tanaka," she murmured, her pronunciation careful and deliberate. The businessman's eyes, initially preoccupied, widened slightly before his expression softened into one of genuine appreciation. "You possess an extraordinary eye for detail, miss." "Elara Vance," she supplied, a warm blush creeping up her cheeks. "Miss Vance, thank you for your consideration," he said, giving a slight nod, before moving toward the conference hall. What Elara failed to notice was Julian Croft, the 34-year-old CEO of Apex Innovations, observing the entire exchange from a distance. Known for his razor-sharp intellect and a demeanor often described as glacial, Julian had forged his empire on a foundation of profound skepticism, a defense mechanism built after a devastating betrayal by his former business partner. He watched as Elara returned to her work, making no show of what she had just done. She just prevented a significant diplomatic blunder, he thought, a flicker of surprise cutting through his usual composure. As Mr. Tanaka walked away, his aide leaned in and whispered something. The businessman turned, his gaze finding Elara once more, this time with a look of renewed interest. Julian's eyes narrowed. In the merciless arena of international business, he had become an expert at identifying the subtle currents that signaled major shifts. This quiet, unassuming correction had just pinged on the radar of one of their most crucial potential partners, and he was the only one in his company who had witnessed it. This single moment of unpretentious integrity was about to trigger a cascade of events that neither of them could possibly foresee. What unfolds when the individual who has perfected the art of being invisible is suddenly thrust into the brightest of spotlights? And what dangerous resentments might be stirred in the shadows? "Wow, you're fluent in Japanese now, or just really good at cleaning up other people's messes?" Cassandra Thorne's voice dripped with condescension as she approached, the sharp click of her designer heels echoing on the polished marble floor. At 30, Cassandra was a woman who commanded the room, her confident posture and impeccably tailored suit a stark contrast to Elara's simple, functional dress. Elara offered only a small, neutral smile in response, saying nothing as she continued to organize the remaining badges. 3 years as a receptionist at Apex Innovations had taught her the survival skill of becoming almost invisible, a tactic that proved invaluable under Cassandra's constant, critical gaze. "I saw that, a warm voice said as Cassandra swept away. Ilara looked up into the kind eyes of Eleanor Hayes, the 62-year-old head receptionist who had been her staunchest ally since her first day. Not everyone values that kind of meticulousness, but the people who matter always do. "I just didn't want him to feel awkward or disrespected," Ilara said quietly. Her photographic memory allowed her to recall every guest's name, company affiliation, and even their dietary restrictions without ever glancing at the database. It was a gift she'd possessed since she was a girl, but one she'd learned to conceal after being relentlessly teased for it in school. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on Ilara's shoulder. "Don't ever let their voices define you. Let your actions be your voice." As if summoned, Julian Croft strode past the reception desk, his cool, assessing gaze sweeping across the lobby before it paused for a fraction of a second on Ilara. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement so subtle it could have been imagined, had Ilara not been so attuned to her surroundings. Cassandra, returning with a steaming cup of coffee, witnessed the fleeting interaction. Her expression soured, her grip tightening around the cup until the hot liquid sloshed precariously close to the rim. Sometimes the most insignificant gesture of recognition can plant the deepest seeds of jealousy. The morning continued with a deceptive calm until a disturbance near the main presentation hall rippled through the crowd. The massive digital display, intended to showcase the names of the international speakers, was a chaotic jumble of errors. Titles were mismatched with names, credentials were misspelled, and affiliations were completely incorrect. From her post, Ilara saw the Japanese delegation exchange troubled looks. Dr. Ito, a leading researcher whose pioneering work in quantum computing had been celebrated globally, frowned as he saw his name paired with a rival university. His colleagues began whispering behind their hands, their discomfort radiating across the room. A distinguished German executive took off his glasses and began polishing them with slow, deliberate strokes, a gesture Ilara had come to recognize as a sign of his deep unease when he was too polite to voice a complaint. The Saudi Arabian contingent had fallen completely silent, their stillness a far more potent condemnation than any verbal protest. "What is going on?" Julian Croft's voice, though not raised, cut through the rising murmur. His icy gaze swept the room and finally landed on Cassandra, whose face had gone pale. "There must be a technical glitch," she stammered, her usual bravado crumbling as she tapped frantically at her tablet. "The IT department was supposed to double-check everything." "Those slides came from your department," Julian interjected, his voice possessing a quiet intensity that was more terrifying to his employees than any shouting could ever be. "This is a complete failure." From her vantage point at the reception desk, Ilara could see the situation spiraling into a full-blown crisis. The Japanese delegates were now in a hushed but urgent discussion, and the German representatives were making pointed glances at their watches. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the correct list materialized in her mind's eye. All 37 international speakers, their proper titles, their affiliations, and the culturally appropriate formatting for each. "If they can't fix the slide, I can help," Ilara whispered to Eleanor, her voice barely audible above the escalating tension. Eleanor squeezed her hand firmly. "Don't let fear silence your kindness, Ilara." Taking a shaky breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, Ilara approached the harried stage manager. She spoke so softly that he had to lean in to hear her over the din. A moment later, she found herself being ushered toward the stage, a microphone being pressed into her hand. Her deepest, most persistent nightmare was unfolding in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen, the stage manager announced into his own mic. "We have the correct information. Ms. Vance from Apex Innovations will guide our technical team through the necessary corrections." An abrupt silence fell over the vast hall. Elara stood frozen, the microphone feeling like a block of ice in her trembling hand, as hundreds of pairs of eyes turned to fix upon her. Her throat tightened, and for a terrifying second she was back in middle school. The sound of her classmates' laughter echoing in her ears as she fumbled through a presentation. Then, she caught sight of Eleanor's encouraging nod from the back of the room. "This isn't about me," Elara told herself, a mantra to quell the rising panic. "This is about making them feel seen and respected." With a voice that started as a quaver, but gradually gained strength, Elara began to recite the information. Dr. Ito Kenji, Director of Quantum Computing at the Kyoto Institute of Technology; Dr. Anja Schmidt, Head of Environmental Sciences at the University of Munich. One by one, the names and titles appeared correctly on the screen behind her. When she had finished, a beat of profound silence hung in the air before the room erupted in a wave of spontaneous applause. Julian Croft stood motionless at the rear of the hall, watching as Elara stepped down from the stage, her cheeks flushed with a combination of profound relief and residual fear. Something in her quiet courage, her unassuming competence, stirred a long-dormant feeling within him. It was an inspiring and unsettling reminder of what genuine integrity looked like. Who could have imagined that the simple act of remembering names could make people feel so profoundly acknowledged? The remainder of the summit proceeded without a hitch, but the atmosphere had undergone a palpable change. Throughout the day, international delegates made a point of stopping by the reception desk to introduce themselves personally to Elara. Several remarked on her astonishing memory and her sensitivity to detail. A Korean executive gave a slight bow as he approached her desk. "Your understanding of our naming conventions is exceptionally rare among Westerners," he said, his voice warm with gratitude. "You afforded everyone a great deal of respect today." An Indian businesswoman added her own praise. "In my country, our names carry the weight of our ancestry and family history. When you took such care to pronounce each one correctly, you were honoring not just us, but our entire heritage." A warmth spread through Elara's chest, chasing away the last of her anxiety. For her entire life, she had been told that her obsessive attention to detail was strange, her memory for names and faces an odd quirk. For the very first time, the traits that had always made her feel different were being celebrated as something valuable. As she tidied her desk at the end of the long day, Elara replayed these moments in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was a place for someone like her in the corporate world after all. A place for someone who noticed the small, important things that everyone else overlooked. None of this escaped Cassandra's resentful gaze. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame?" she hissed as she breezed past Elara during a brief lull. "Don't think for a second I don't see what you're doing, trying to show off in front of the CEO and make my department look incompetent." "That was never my intention," Elara started to say, but Cassandra had already stalked off, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and simmering rage. Later that afternoon, Elara was startled by an email that appeared on her screen. The subject line in stark, bold letters: "Report to the CEO's office immediately." Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she rode the silent express elevator to the top floor, a rarefied domain she had never before entered. Julian Croft's executive assistant, a stern woman with an air of formidable efficiency, led her into the vast, minimalist office without a word. Julian stood with his back to her, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Chicago cityscape below. The late afternoon sun cast his tall frame in sharp silhouette, a solitary figure against the backdrop of a metropolis he had helped to shape. Without turning around, he spoke, his voice calm and even. "Do you have any idea what happened after you corrected those names this morning, Ms. Vance?" Alara clasped her hands together, fighting a desperate urge to fidget. The cavernous office felt as though it were closing in on her, its sleek, modern design offering no place to hide. She struggled to control her breathing, remembering all the chilling rumors she'd heard about Julian Croft's swift dismissals and unforgiving standards. "I'm very sorry if I overstepped my bounds." "Mr. Tanaka signed the partnership agreement this afternoon," Julian continued, as if she hadn't spoken, his tone revealing nothing. "A $300 million deal giving us exclusive distribution rights in the Asian market." He finally turned, and his piercing gaze fixed on her, assessing her with an intensity that made Alara feel as though he could see straight through her carefully constructed composure to the terrified single mother beneath. He made a specific point of mentioning the profound respect shown by our company, particularly in the correct honoring of names and titles. Alara blinked, the news so far beyond what she could have imagined that it didn't seem real. "You're the receptionist, is that correct?" Julian asked, though his tone made it clear it was not a question. "Yes, sir, for 3 years." Julian picked up a thin folder from his polished desk. "Your employee file indicates you have no special skills or training." Alara looked down at her own hands, suddenly finding them fascinating. "I just try to do my job, Mr. Croft." "Your job description does not include memorizing the names, titles, and affiliations of 37 international executives," he stated, his tone still unreadable. "Nor does it include noticing when a Japanese businessman's name is reversed on a badge." I notice things about people," she said softly. "Their names are important. It's how we know we're seen, that we matter." Something flickered across Julian's face, a fleeting expression so quick that Alara thought she might have imagined it. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice dropping slightly. "Why step onto that stage when you were clearly terrified? Why fix that name tag when no one else would have ever known the difference?" Alara considered her answer, choosing her words with care. "Because I knew it was important to them. I wasn't trying to do anything else." Julian studied her for a long, silent moment before something utterly unexpected happened. He smiled. It was a small thing, barely a softening around his eyes and the corners of his mouth, but on his normally impassive face, it was as dramatic as a thunderclap. "This world needs more people who do the right thing and fewer people who are just trying to impress," he said finally. "Thank you for your attention to detail, Ms. Vance. That will be all." What neither of them realized was that Cassandra Thorne had been waiting just outside the door, listening to every word, her eyes glinting with a venomous jealousy. Sometimes the quietest actions produce the loudest echoes, especially when they are witnessed by the right eyes. The following morning, Alara arrived at work to find the office buzzing with hushed conversations that abruptly ceased the moment she walked past. Her receptionist's desk, once her anonymous sanctuary, now felt like an exposed stage where her every move was being scrutinized. She could feel the weight of her colleagues' stares on her back as she organized the day's visitor badges, the air thick with unspoken speculation. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Colleagues who had never given her a second glance were suddenly sending connection requests on professional networking sites. Department heads who had never acknowledged her existence were now inventing reasons to stroll past her reception desk. This sudden, unwanted visibility made her skin crawl. She had never sought recognition. She had only ever wanted to do her job well and provide a stable life for her son. Eleanor met her at the desk, her kind face etched with concern. The older woman's unwavering presence had been Alara's anchor during her 3 years at Apex, a voice of sanity and wisdom whenever the currents of office politics grew turbulent. "You need to know," she said in a low voice, leaning in close so only Alara could hear. "Cassandra has been telling people that you're angling for the CEO's attention, that you're using your position for personal gain." The blood drained from Alara's face, and her hands felt suddenly icy. The idea that anyone could believe she would resort to such manipulation to get ahead felt like a physical blow. "What? But why would she?" A crisp, impersonal voice crackled over the intercom, cutting her off. "Alara Vance to Human Resources, please." Alara Vance to HR. In the sterile, windowless HR conference room, Alara sat across a polished table from three grim-faced individuals. They laid out the allegations with bureaucratic detachment: inappropriate attempts to curry favor with the CEO, intentionally undermining the public relations department, and overstepping professional boundaries. "These are very serious concerns, Ms. Vance," the HR director said, his expression unreadable. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Words utterly failed her. How could she possibly defend intentions that had been nothing but pure? How could she prove the absence of a manipulative agenda? Dismissed with a formal warning and placed under investigation. Alara found herself in the break room, tears finally spilling over and streaming down her face as Eleanor held her hand. "I was just trying to do the right thing," Alara sobbed, the injustice of it all feeling like a lead weight in her chest. "How did it turn into this?" Eleanor handed her a tissue, her touch a small island of comfort in a sea of turmoil. Kindness is often misunderstood in a world like this, because people who do the right thing don't feel the need to broadcast their motives, but the truth, Alara, always finds its way to the light. Neither of them noticed Julian Croft standing in the doorway, his expression hardening as he took in the scene before silently backing away. He was all too familiar with this scenario, the memory of his former partner's betrayal, of how trust and apparent kindness had been used as weapons against him, was never far from his mind. But there was something about Ilara's raw, genuine distress that struck a different chord. This wasn't the calculated, theatrical performance of a manipulator he had become so adept at identifying. This was the quiet grief of someone with true integrity. The shy, single mother who had impressed him with her quiet competence was now being punished for the very qualities that made her so exceptional. Something had to be done. Truth, when buried, doesn't simply die. It waits patiently for someone courageous enough to dig it up. That afternoon, an all-staff meeting was called with no warning. The email announcement had come directly from Julian Croft's office, a rare occurrence that sent a fresh wave of speculation and anxiety through the entire company. Some whispered about imminent financial trouble, others of a hostile takeover. As employees filed into the main conference room, the tension was so thick you could almost taste it. Alara had considered skipping the meeting altogether. The thought of facing a room full of her colleagues after the humiliating HR interrogation made her stomach churn. She had spent her entire lunch break hidden in a bathroom stall, desperately trying to pull herself together, while the morning's events played on a torturous loop in her mind, wondering how a simple act of respect had spiraled into such a nightmare. "You can't hide forever," Eleanor had texted her. "Whatever happens, I'm right here in your corner." Taking a deep, fortifying breath, Alara slipped into a seat in the back row of the crowded room, instinctively trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. A few colleagues offered her sympathetic smiles, but most pointedly averted their gaze, clearly uncertain which side of this unfolding office drama was the safer one to be on. Julian Croft entered through a side door, his commanding presence immediately silencing the remaining chatter. In a departure from his usual style of diving straight into business, He paused, his eyes scanning the room until they rested for a moment on Alara before he moved to the podium. The subtle gesture was not lost on the more observant employees, who exchanged knowing glances. "I've called this meeting to address a fundamental issue of our company culture," he began, his voice cool and measured. "At Apex Innovations, we claim to value integrity, excellence, and respect. Today, I want to take a hard look at how well we are actually living up to those values." The large screen behind him flickered to life, displaying security footage from the conference. There was Alara at the reception desk, quietly and efficiently reprinting Mr. Tanaka's name badge. The footage continued, showing a montage of her small, unnoticed actions throughout the morning: mopping up a spilled glass of water, finding and returning a lost document, discreetly guiding an elderly guest to a comfortable seat. A collective, quiet gasp went through the room. Alara felt herself shrink into her chair, a hot flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck as her private, unthinking actions were displayed for everyone to see. She had no idea cameras had been capturing these moments she had never intended for any audience. The video continued, showing Alara assisting a flustered Japanese delegate who had misplaced his presentation notes, then helping a German executive find his reading glasses. Each small act of service unfolded in silent black and white footage that somehow made the gestures seem even more significant. "This," Julian said, his voice taking on a sharp edge that made everyone sit up a little straighter, "is the employee who has been accused of seeking personal advancement through inappropriate means." A profound silence descended upon the room. Alara could feel tears welling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked furiously, determined not to break down in front of the entire company. Beside her, a colleague she barely knew gently touched her arm in a gesture of silent support. The video shifted to the chaos in the conference hall, capturing Alara's terrified expression as she was handed the microphone, her hands shaking visibly. The footage revealed what the audience had not been able to see from their seats: how she had closed her eyes, squared her shoulders, and taken a single, deep breath before she began to speak. It was not confidence that had driven her actions, but something deeper, more fundamental: a simple, powerful desire to set things right. "And this," Julian continued, gesturing toward the screen where Alara's nervous figure now stood, calmly reciting names and titles, "is what true courage looks like. It is not the absence of fear. It is fear overcome by a concern for others." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing them to settle over the room. The silence was absolute. Not even the usual rustle of papers or the buzz of a stray phone disturbed the moment. Alara felt suspended in time, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the people nearest to her could hear it. "Before we proceed," Julian said, his tone shifting slightly, "I want to share something personal. Many of you know me only as the CEO who demands results. Some of you call me cold, calculating, even ruthless." A ripple of uncomfortable self-recognition moved through the audience. "What you don't know is why." He took off his glasses, a gesture so uncharacteristic that several senior executives exchanged surprised glances. 8 years ago, I placed my trust in someone who presented themselves as genuine, selfless, and kind. They became my business partner and my closest friend. Then, they systematically stole our clients, copied our proprietary designs, and very nearly destroyed everything I had spent my life building. His voice remained perfectly steady, but those in the front rows could see the faint tightness around his eyes. Since that day, I have been selective about whom I trust. I have prioritized measurable results over character, efficiency over humanity. Julian put his glasses back on, his composed, formidable demeanor sliding back into place. "I tell you this not to excuse my methods, but to explain why what you have just seen represents something I had almost forgotten could exist in the world of business. He turned to face the room directly, his gaze sweeping over the assembled employees. For 3 years, Ms. Vance has worked at our reception desk. In that time, she has learned the names, faces, and personal details of every employee, client, and partner who has walked through these doors. Not because it was in her job description, not because anyone noticed or praised her for it, but because she believes that people deserve to be seen correctly. His gaze found Cassandra in the crowd, who seemed to be physically shrinking in her seat. Meanwhile, the very department specifically tasked with our public relations failed to correctly display the names of our most important international partners and then attempted to shift blame rather than take responsibility. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Effective immediately, Ms. Thorne is suspended pending a full review, Julian announced, his voice leaving no room for argument, and Ms. Vance will be offered a new position within this company, should she choose to accept it. He looked directly at Alara, his gaze holding hers from across the room. The world is not always fair, but sometimes a single person who is brave enough to do what is right can change everything. As the meeting broke up, a stunned and buzzing crowd filtering out of the room, Alara remained frozen in her seat, unable to fully process what had just occurred. This stunning public vindication was the very last thing she had expected when she had walked into work that morning, dreading the day ahead. In a world filled with noise and self-promotion, sometimes it is the quietest voice that is finally, truly heard. 2 weeks later, Alara was settling into her new role in the International Relations Department. Her new desk was situated by a large window overlooking Millennium Park, bathed in a natural light that felt symbolic of her own emergence from the shadowed corner of the reception area. She had spent the past fortnight immersing herself in the protocols of international communications, studying cultural nuances that went far beyond naming conventions, and was surprised to find her new colleagues actively seeking her input on matters of etiquette and presentation. The transition had not been entirely seamless. A few employees still regarded her with a hint of suspicion, whispering about the mysterious connection that had catapulted a receptionist onto the fast track. Others, who had never bothered to learn her name despite her greeting them every single morning for years, now fumbled through awkward introductions, as if they were meeting her for the first time. Alara was organizing translation requests for an upcoming conference in Tokyo when she saw Cassandra Thorne approaching her desk. Alara instinctively straightened her posture, a part of her bracing for a confrontation. But Cassandra's usual power walk was gone, replaced by an uncharacteristic hesitation. Her designer suit was as impeccable as ever, but there was a new vulnerability in her expression that Alara had never witnessed before. "Do you have a minute?" Cassandra asked, her voice softer than Alara had ever heard it. Alara nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside her desk. She noticed Cassandra's hands were fidgeting with the clasp of her bracelet, a nervous habit she had observed countless times from her old post at reception, where she had become an unwitting expert in the subtle, nonverbal language of every employee in the building. "I used to think you were just some silly, naive receptionist," Cassandra began, then paused, looking for the right words. "But I think I was wrong. You could have told everyone that the presentation errors were my fault. You could have destroyed me, but you didn't." "I don't want anyone to lose their job," Alara replied simply. "I just want people to do good work. And good work doesn't have to be loud to be effective." Cassandra studied her for a long moment, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes. "I've never understood people like you. People who just help others without expecting anything back. Maybe that's because you've never been in a position where you needed that kind of help," Ilara suggested gently. Something in Cassandra's guarded expression seemed to shift. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not crucifying me in front of everyone." As Cassandra walked away, Alara glanced up and saw Julian Croft observing their interaction from his office doorway. He approached her desk, his own movements marked by an unusual hesitancy. "Are you settling in well?" he asked. Alara nodded. "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been very welcoming." A brief, comfortable silence stretched between them before Julian spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said in my office that day, about names being how we know we matter. It's something my grandfather taught me," Alara explained. A rare flicker of vulnerability crossed Julian's features. "My entire career has been focused on results, profits, measurable outcomes. I think I stopped noticing the people." He met her gaze directly. "In a world that is constantly shouting for attention, perhaps what finally caught mine was your silence at just the right moment." Before she could formulate a response, he continued, "We're restructuring the company's international public relations team. I'd like you to lead it. Your attention to detail and your innate cultural awareness would be invaluable." As he walked away, Alara realized that something profound had shifted, not just in her title or her location within the company, but in how she perceived herself. The quiet certainty that had always guided her actions was no longer a secret quirk to be hidden, but a strength to be honored. This incredible, inspirational transformation had all started with the simple correction of a name tag, irrefutable proof that even the smallest, most unassuming acts of integrity can change lives in ways we can never possibly expect. The words we choose to speak may reveal our thoughts, but it is the actions we take, especially when no one is looking, that truly reveal our hearts. 1 year later, the entire Apex Innovations team gathered for Eleanor Hayes' retirement celebration. The venue, a stunning rooftop garden overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline, was aglow with twinkling fairy lights and filled with elegant floral arrangements that reflected Eleanor's lifelong love of gardening. The setting sun cast a warm, golden light over the assembled crowd, painting the moment with a sentiment that perfectly matched the occasion. Alara paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. The space was filled with faces, both familiar and new. There were senior executives who had once strode past her without a second glance, but who now greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. There were international clients who had flown in from across the globe specifically for the event, and the dedicated support staff who had been Eleanor's extended family for decades. In one corner, Eleanor was chatting animatedly with a group of young interns, her silvery laugh carrying across the rooftop. She had spent her final months at Apex mentoring the next generation, passing on not just procedures and protocols, but the core philosophy that had guided her entire career. That kindness and competence were not mutually exclusive, but essential partners. Alara smoothed the fabric of her dress, a confident sapphire blue that would have seemed far too bold for the woman she had been a year ago, and made her way through the crowd. Guests turned to greet her with warm smiles, some sharing anecdotes about working with her international team, others remarking on the profound, positive changes they had witnessed in the company culture. "There she is," Julian said, appearing at her side with 2 flutes of champagne. "The woman who started a quiet revolution." Alara accepted the glass, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "I think you're giving me far too much credit." "Am I?" Julian's usually stern expression had softened considerably over the past year. The ice-cold CEO was still brilliantly strategic, still demanded excellence, but his employees had begun to see glimpses of the man beneath the polished corporate armor. "The international division has shattered every previous sales record. Our client retention is at an all-time high. And it all began with a name tag." "With respect," Alara corrected gently. "It started with respect." Eleanor taught me that kindness is never a weakness, she said, her gaze finding her mentor across the room. She taught me that doing the right thing, even when you think no one is watching, shapes not just who we are, but the world around us. From his seat in the front row, Julian Croft nodded almost imperceptibly. The company had been transformed under his leadership in the past year. A new emphasis on ethical practices and genuine relationship building had, to the surprise of many on their board, led to the most profitable quarters in the company's history. After the formal ceremony, Alara found a beautiful bouquet of orchids waiting for her. A card from the Beijing office was attached. The card read simply, "To the woman who showed us that respect begins with the smallest details. Your company is a reflection of your values." As Alara mingled with the guests, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was Cassandra Thorne, who had transferred to the company's West Coast branch. "Congratulations on the promotion," Cassandra said, extending her hand. "I hear your department is breaking all the records." "Thank you," Alara replied, shaking her hand. "How is California?" "Different," Cassandra admitted with a small smile. "Better, I think. I'm learning to listen more." She handed Alara a small, elegantly wrapped gift bag. "I brought this for you." Inside was a beautiful, custom-made nameplate for Alara's desk, engraved with a simple inscription, "Thank you for teaching me grace, even when I didn't deserve it." As the evening began to wind down, Julian approached with 2 fresh glasses of champagne, offering one to Alara. "To Eleanor," he proposed. "To Eleanor," Alara agreed. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle to life below them, before Julian spoke again. "You've changed this company, Alara," he said quietly. Alara shook her head. "You changed the company. I just did my job." "No," Julian insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "You reminded all of us what the job is really about." He raised his glass again. "Sometimes, the way a person fixes a single name badge can change the way you see the entire world." Alara held Eleanor's hand, her eyes brimming with emotion as she watched the soft lights of the party dance across the room. Around them, the celebration continued. Executives were chatting with maintenance staff. International clients were laughing with interns. The invisible barriers of position and status had temporarily dissolved in the warm, genuine atmosphere of connection. Alara took it all in, feeling a profound sense of belonging she had never expected to find in this place. Her gaze met Eleanor's from across the room, and the older woman gave her a knowing, loving smile. In that moment, Alara understood that her greatest gift had never been her memory for names or her attention to detail. It was her willingness to see others, to truly see them when the rest of the world was looking right past. The light softened, and Alara smiled, knowing that this incredible, heartwarming journey had finally come full circle.